borrowers were notified, Mr. Chair. Based on what we have, Mr. Chair, on or about June 19, 2006, notices were given to borrowers.
Yes, and then as I've said earlier, even if they're given notice and even with their objections, they cannot stop the sale. Tama po ba?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Now, in the previous hearing, Attorney Adjong, there was mentioned that the loan sold to PI1 had different values to SPB. Loans valued more than the others. Sino ho yung may mas value more than the others and why? And what loans was valued less and why?
Mr. Chair, the bidders were given the chance to allocate a purchase price for a specific account. And that's where it's called purchase price allocation. And that's where we got the figures that the Lopez accounts were valued higher by the SPV, Mr. Chair.
And in the position paper presented before the committee, it was stated that the loans of the Maynilad and Bayantel were subsequently sold to Deutsche Bank and the Clearwater Capital Partners. Can you confirm that?
We are not privy, Mr. Chair, to the transactions made by PI1 with respect to these accounts, Mr. Chair.
Can anybody answer from those present in the committee?
Mr. Chair, this is Carlos Manalak from Philippine Investment. Are you asking if we can verify the sale to Deutsche and Clearwater, sir?
Yes.
Yes, two portions that we can verify. Benpress, I believe, was sold to Deutsche in 2008. And then I think it was Bayantel was sold to Clearwater. We have records for the Deutsche sale. We only have reference to the Clearwater sale, but we're still trying to track down those documents. But those two loans were eventually sold to third parties.
Now, did the Lopez Group participate in acquiring these loans from the PI1?
We had no contact with the Lopez Group at this point in time, at least based on our records. And we do not know whether Deutsche and Clearwater acted on behalf of anyone else, because they do participate in this business, meaning Deutsche and Clearwater. So we don't know if they acted on a principal basis, buying it for their own business, or they acted on behalf of a principal. We only have the records that it was sold to these two entities and that funds were received from these two entities.
Thank you, Mr. Carlos. Now to DBP. Again, in your submission of the non-performing loans and non-performing assets from 1989 to 2006 and were included in the 9.56 billion loan package sold to SPB, have any of these loans been questioned by any court or as audit as it relates to BSP eligibility or the legality of the loans being sold to an SPP?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any case filed against DBP questioning the transfer of any of these accounts to the SPV, Mr. Chair.
How about any audit from COA finding that its audit reports of that year as to any concerns involved with those transactions?
Mr. Chair, the transaction was audited by COA and they had no adverse findings on DBP. Similarly, Mr. Chair, this was part of the regular examination of the BSP, and likewise, no adverse findings or observation were made on these transactions, Mr. Chair.
Now, there are other allegations that the DBP, by selling these loans, the DBP almost went bankrupt. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any such allegation, Mr. Chair, as in fact, it is not true, Mr. Chair, based on my knowledge.
Based on your knowledge. Now, how did the selling of these loans affect the financial health and position of DBP?
Mr. Chair, that would call for another resource person, but from what I've heard, Mr. Chair, the NPL and the other ratios of the bank improved as a result of this transaction, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Chairman, do you have any representative from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas?
Yes, we have they're on Zoom. Attorney Miss Cube pala and Attorney Chofilo Chagadio.
May I direct the question to them? After the SPB law was enacted in 2002, did the banks immediately avail of the law? I mean, not only DBP, but other commercial banks.
Mr. Chair, good morning. This is Mean Cube. Relative to the question po, I can only answer for DBP, sir, that they applied for a COE around 2006. And so the COE was issued in September 2007, sir.
So, based on your knowledge and recollection, how many banks started selling their non-performing loans? And what percent of the non-performing loans and non-performing assets were being sold in, say, in 2003, in 2004, and so on?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I do not have that information.
Can anyone answer from the BSP?
Mr. Chair, perhaps we can go back to our records to satisfy the question, Mr. Chair.
You may do so. Please proceed.
But sir, we will have to check with our admin for the record, sir, because that has been quite some time from now. So we don't have that information at this time po.
In the next scheduled hearing, please submit all those answers that can correlate or be an answer to my question. Can you do that, ma'am?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we'll look into our records to satisfy the query, Mr. Chair.
Now, as of 2005, or was DBP the only government financial institution to avail of the SPB law?
Mr. Chair, we also looked into Land Bank as it was a subject of query in the past hearings. So Land Bank likewise availed or rather applied for ACOE.
How about PDIC?
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't have that information for now. PDIC, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I wouldn't have that information for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Now to DBP, as the SPB law was enacted in 2002, why did it take DBP 4 years before it availed of the SPB law?
There was admittedly there was a delay to avail of the Pablo, when we began to we started to to use that to clean our books, the law lapsed, so it was until the extension that we completed the bulk sale of the non-performing assets.
No further question, Mr. Chair. That would be all. I will reserve some of my question in the next scheduled hearing. Salamat po.
Is that all, Honorable Garbin?
That would be all, Mr. Chair. And let me reserve my questions in the next scheduled hearing, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our Senior Vice Chair, Senior Deputy Majority Leader Boying Remulla, Deputy Speaker Rodante Marcoleta, Representative Aurelio Gonzalez Jr., Deputy Majority Leader Yul Servo Nieto, and Vice Chair Jake Villa. Before we proceed, can I have one question to the DPP? During the first committee hearing, January 18, 2021, Ms. Cube of the BSP mentioned that a loan can be considered non-performing after 180 days of its due date. It remained unpaid. So 180 days lang, sabi ni Ms. Cube. Why is the Maynilad Benpress loans declared as non-performing loan in 2003 when the loan granted to Maynilad was already non-performing or non-payment as early as the 1990s? So I heard also that there were several extensions of maturity date for the Lopez loans. So can you answer that? Why was it granted several extensions of maturity date?
Mr. Chair, as to the reason why extensions were granted, we have to refer to the records, Mr. Chair, as none of us, well, at least I was not involved in the handling of the account.
Okay.
So we have to refer to
we
the
will
records.
go to Miss Remedios Makalintag. Mama, good morning again. Hello.
Yes. Can you
Yes,
hear
ma'am. Do you remember any, because this was there were several approval of extension of maturity date for the Lopez loans. Are you aware of any extension granted to their maturity date during your time?
Well, that was 20 years ago, but it is usual to extend payments of to extend maturity dates. It's usual for banks to extend to give extensions. So it's not something unusual. It's usually done.
Okay, thank you. Next to interpolate is the Deputy Speaker, Rodante Marcoleta. You are recognized, DS Marcoleta. Hello, DS Marcoleta? Wala. Please unmute, DS. You cannot be heard.
Ano po? Mute ba ako?
Walang Marcoleta. Wala na. Sino susunod? Next to interpolate is the Senior Vice Chair, Congressman Boying Remulla.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. Chairman. Ito muna tatanungin ko ang DBP muna, no? Para malinaw lang. Diyan sa Mr. Herbosa. is President Herbosa in?
No, only Naniagas, chairman ng 2002 to 2006.
Okay.
Saka si Remedios Makalintag, 98 to 2003.
Okay. Kasi anyway, anybody from DBP can answer, no? Ang DBP po ay isang pag-aari ng taong bayan. It's a state-owned bank. Tama ho, no?
Yes,
Attorney
Mr.
Adjong,
Chair.
no?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
It's a state-owned bank. Ang ibig sabihin, ang gobyerno ay pumasok sa banking, sa pagbabangko, at ang kapital nito ay nanggaling sa gobyerno. Tama ho?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ang capitalization po ng DBP ay magkano ho ngayon? Ang authorized capital ng DBP, magkano ho?
Under its present charter, the authorized capital stock is 35 billion with paid up of 32 billion, Mr. Chair.
32 billion paid up. Pero ang sabi sa Wikipedia, ang assets more than 669 billion. Tama ho yun?
It's even higher, Mr. Chair.
Higher pa.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Maybe in the trillions already. Mga 1 trillion na kayo. Mahigit.
1 trillion as of end of the year.
And you're in the top. Kayo ay nasa pang-anim o pang-pito sa pinakamalaking bangko sa Pilipinas.
Number 6, Mr. Chair.
Pang-anim na kayo, no?
Assets, yes, Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
in terms of assets. At ito ay dahil maganda ang pagkaka-manage ng bangko ng mga professional na nandito. Ngunit ang lahat po ng empleyado ng DBP ay government employee. Pwede ba ho natin sabihin yun?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Oho. At ang hawak pong pera ng DBP ay pera ni Juan de la Cruz. Pera ng bawat Pilipino na nagbabayad ng buwis. Tama ho yun?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Oh. Ngayon, ang tanong dito kasi, pagka nagpautang tayo sa iba't ibang mga tao, inyong tinitingnan na kanilang credit, di ba? Kayo ina-evaluate nyo kung kaya magbayad nito mga kliyente na nangungutang sa DBP. Sigurado ho yun.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Oh,
They are subjected to a stringent credit evaluation.
Stringent credit
Evaluation.
evaluation. No? Ngayon, ang original charter po ng DBP ay pautangin ang agricultural tsaka industrial sectors ng ating lipunan. Tama ho?
Original, yes, Mr. Chair.
Kasi ang DBP tinatag pagkatapos ng gera ng World War II, 1947, tinatag ang DBP para sa reconstruction ng Pilipinas kasi wasak na wasak tayo ng panahon ng Hapon. Tama ho, no?
Yes, Mr. Chair. That's the history of DB.
Yun ang history ng DBP. Ngayon, mula doon, nung panahon na yon, ano ho ang mga pagbabago sa mandato o sa mandate ng DBP? Bukod po sa industrial, tsaka sa agricultural, mula sa industrial, anyway, mula agricultural tsaka industrial, ano po naging mandate pa ng DBP? Paano ho nag-evolve? Ano ho ang evolution niyan?
Mr. Chair, that would require for a review of the history, but maybe, Mr. Chair, presently, DBP has 4 priority areas.
Okay, 4 priority areas. Ano ho ito?
These are infrastructure, MSME, social services, and environment, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yung 4 na mandates nyo, service, yung inyong, ano tawag doon? Anong tawag nyo sa mga bagay na yun?
Priority areas.
Priority areas. Saan ho pumapasok ang Lopez Group of Companies sa priority areas nyo?
Mr. Chair, we have to consider that the loans to Lopez's were given way before these priority areas have been identified by DBP.
Kailan na-identify itong priority areas?
If I can provide one, Mr. Chair, it most likely under this current administration, Mr. Chair.
Ngayon lang binago ang kanyang...
With respect to identifying these 4 priorities.
Nung araw kahit sino pa uutangin nyo, ganun. O wala kayong bawal, basta lahat pwede pa utangin nung araw.
Subject to... again,
Tama ba?
Mr.
Merong
Chair.
hong OFW, gustong bumili ng bahay. Pwede ba sila mangutang sa DBP?
Mr. Chair, DBP is not, as far as I know, we are not into housing provider.
Wala kayo sa retail banking, hindi kayo nagpo-provide sa pangangailangan ng mamamayan na maliliit.
Except for salary loans, Mr. Chair. We are not into retail banking.
Okay. Kaya yung mga pangangailangan ng maliliit na tao, hindi talaga kayo nagsiservisyo.
Well, they can fall under MSME, Mr. Chair.
Oh, kasi ang laki-laki. Ilan ang branches ng DBP? 100 na ba?
We have 129 branches
Oh.
plus 11 branch-like
Ang
units.
kinakausap nyo mayayaman lang? Hindi kayo kumakausap ng hindi masyadong mayaman o kaya yung taong nangangailangan ng mangutang na mamamayan, hindi nyo ko kinakausap. Yung malalaki lang ang kinakausap nyo.
Mr. Chair, we are into developmental projects and it does not go into whether mayaman po or mahirap, but more of if they would fall within these priority areas and other programs of DBP.
Kaya kung maliit ang kailangan, ayaw nyo. Gusto nyo yung malalaking pautang lang.
Again, Mr. Chair, we have MSME programs for the those that would fall under that category, Mr. Chair.
Hindi, tinatanong ko lang to kasi ang ginagamit po ng DBP rito, dapat maalala ng tao, ang Development Bank of the Philippines ay isang bangko na pag-aari ng mamamayang Pilipino. Tama ho, no?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Kaya pag meron tayong nawawalang pera, o kaya may pagkukulang, o kaya meron nangyari na may napagbigyan, kailangan magpaliwanag ito sa taong bayan.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Bale, lahat po ng ginagawa ng DBP, accountable po tayo sa ating mamamayan sa lahat po ng ginagawa.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ang COA lang nag-audit o kaya ang BSP sinusupervise, pumasok na demanda sa Sandigan Bayan o kaya na nakasuhan ng ombudsman o sinuspend ng ombudsman.
Mr. Chair, I cannot comment on that, Mr. Chair.
Hindi mo ko kaya mag-comment dahil sa legal services may mga bagay na pinoprotektahan nyo yung privacy ng mga inyong mga mamaya, inyong mga empleyado.
That's for one, Mr. Chair. And when officers of the bank are charged criminally, the legal services group does not represent them, Mr. Chair.
Pero alam nyo kung may nangyayari o wala. Alam nyo.
If we are invited or we are asked to participate, Mr. Chair. But as a matter of...
Minsan nababasa nyo lang sa dyaryo kung may
yes,
nangyayari.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ngayon I saw Dante Marcoleta on the screen ready. Maybe he can first ask the questions and then I'll just follow up later.
Thank
Salamat
you.
po.
Thank you, Senior Vice Chair Remulla. Next to interpolate is the Deputy Speaker, Rodante Marcoleta. DS Marcoleta. Unmute, please.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair. Good morning to everyone. Mr. Chair, may I direct my initial questions to any representative from Benpress Holdings Corporation?
Yes, Mr. Salvador Tirona. And Attorney Quezon, the Corporate Secretary, Lopez Holdings. Please direct your questions now, DS Marcoleta.
Who is on board, Mr. Chair? Who among those mentioned is on board?
Yes, they are on board, the both of them, Attorney Quezon and Mr. Tirona.
Thank you. Anybody from those mentioned can answer, Mr. Chair. I'd like to know when was Benpress Holdings Corporation was incorporated.
Mr. Chairman, Benpress Holdings was incorporated in 1993.
1993?
1993, Mr. Chairman.
Would you tell us the reason, please, why only in 1993 was Benpress Holdings was incorporated?
It was incorporated to be a holding company for...
Why only in 1993? Is there any reason?
It was incorporated in 1993 to be a listed company to raise capital for the infrastructure projects of the Lopez Group.
Mr. Chair, the question is why only in 1993? Why not in 1990, 89, or earlier?
I cannot answer that question. That was a business decision, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Before 1993, how was it called?
There was no Ben Press Holdings Corporation before 1993, Mr. Chairman.
What is the name of?
But there was a Ben Press Corporation, which is the
There was Benpress Corporation, but not Holdings Corporation. Is that right?
yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Bakit po ninyo in-incorporate as Benpress Holdings Corporation? Who are the incorporators?
These were the family members of the Lopez, Mr. Eugenio Lopez Jr., Mr. Oscar M. Lopez, Mr. Sinakis, Mrs. Sinakis, Manuel M. Lopez. Those are the family members.
So these are the same members of the families that also incorporated ABS, EFCB, Holdings Corporations. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Lopez Inc.
Can you speak louder, Attorney Quezon?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Those are the family members.
After its incorporation, were there any financial ventures entered into with other companies? What is that, sir?
Can you clarify the question, Mr.
Can you
Chairman?
repeat the question, sir? Mr.
I'm asking the chair that after the incorporation of Holdings, Benpress Holdings Corporation, if there were any financial ventures that it entered into with other companies. Let's say, I'm talking about financial deals and joint ventures.
Well, it had joint ventures to create Maynilad. It had a joint venture with the French company.
Kung pwedeng pakilakas lamang po para...
It had a joint venture with the French company to create Maynilad, Mr. Chairman. Also, with Bayantel, it had a joint venture with the 9X Corporation to create Bayantel Inc.
So if we say financial ventures with other companies, we also mean loans. Can you confirm that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. How were these financial ventures financed?
Benpress had an initial public offering in 1993, so it had some equity fundraising. It also had raised its capital from the LTCPs and through loan from borrowings from the bank.
Okay, are you in a position to furnish this committee or submit under oath the complete list of your financial ventures?
Mr. Chairman, can I refer this to Mr. Tirona?
Mr. Tirona, can you answer the request of DS Marcoleta?
May I clarify, Mr. Chairman, you're asking for the list of the joint ventures entered into by Benpress into the other companies?
Financial ventures na lang para mas madali tayo. Whether or not they involve joint ventures, but we are specifically more concerned about the financial ventures entered into by Benpress.
Mr. Chairman, the financial ventures, just like to clarify, the financial ventures would include a list of our creditors?
Yes, specifically the loans availed of.
Yes, with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, we have submitted to the committee the list of our creditors for Bayantel, for Maynilad, and as well as the other companies that are currently being discussed in this committee hearing.
What is the time frame involved here, Mr. Tirona?
For the, for example, Mr. Chairman, if we talk of the buy and tell, the time frame here would be, if I'm not mistaken, in 1919, which was called the Omnibus Loan Agreement, where all the financial companies that let buy and tell were listed in that document, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, can we assume that BenPres also absorbed financial obligations like outstanding loans of other companies it entered into, whether natural or juridical?
I'd like to clarify that question, Mr. Chairman. It's not clear in my mind what the question is.
We're talking of, let's say, when you entered with financial ventures, there might be obligations like what we had established earlier this morning on questioning of Congressman Garbin. BenPres assumed some obligations of Maynilad. So things like this, nature of transactions like this, we would like to know if BenPres absorbed other financial obligations of other companies you entered into. More specifically, whether or not these were entered prior to 1993. Are there cases like this, Mr. Tirona?
None, not that I know of, Mr. Chairman.
Yung sa financial obligations po natin, dahil sinabi kanina nung kasama ninyo that meron kayong mga financial ventures and we would like to know, kasi po kailangan nating malaman kung paano natin babayaran yung mga obligations that you entered into. Not only with BenPres itself, but also with those entered into with its affiliated companies. Paano po yung mga security aspects nito? Last hearing, I remember, Mr. Chair, that I asked if BenPres can submit yun pong mga contractual obligations so that we will be able to know from there ano-ano po yung interest rates, ano po yung mga collaterals na in-establish doon, because we will not be able to know this until and unless you provide us the terms of your contracts with the committee. Were you able to provide this? I know, Mr. Chair, that this is one of those I requested during the last hearing.
Mr. Chair, to answer that directly, yes, we submitted the documents referred to or asked by the congressman. This was submitted last February 16 to the committee. It included the documents for the loans as well as which included the list of securities and lenders of the loans, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Considering if the government ever guaranteed the payment of some of these loans, was there any government guarantee, Mr. Tirona?
There was no government guarantee on any of these loans, Mr. Chairman.
Sino po yung mga partido na involved dun sa mga obligations? Para ma-establish po natin yung collateral and incidental contracts, including deeds of assignment kung meron po.
Kung sa apat po na kumpanya na involved po, if we talk first of Maynilad, the actual contract, borrower is Maynilad Corporation or Maynilad Water Services Corporation, Incorporation itself, and that carried a suretyship of BenPres. For Buy and Tell, it was Bayan Telecommunications Inc. that was the direct borrower, and this was secured by various mortgages. For Benpress, these were long-term commercial papers, Mr. Chair. So therefore, it only had a negative pledge issued by Benpress to all the LTCP holders. For the Sky Cable, I'm sorry, but I cannot give you the details as I was, my colleague is not with us right now, Mr. Ventosa, but from what I know, the Sky Cable was originally a home cable debt, which was secured by a mortgage also.
Mr. Tirona, your answers will be subjected to some evaluations anyway if this representation is able to look into the documents that you have submitted. You will agree with that, right?
Yes, sir.
Prior to the 1986 assumption into power of President Cory Aquino, were there any financial problems encountered by those obligations absorbed by Benpress? I'm assuming that even prior to 1993, when Benpress Holding is not yet incorporated, but it is a corporation, do you recall some financial extensions or absorptions given to any company affiliated with Benpress or Lopez Company that had encountered some problems?
I was not connected with the Lopez Group at that time, and I have no knowledge of such.
Do you have somebody in your company today, Mr. Tirona, who will be in a position to at least recall some of...
Attorney Quezon, do you have some input on this?
Mr. Chairman, I also cannot answer that question since I joined the Lopez Holdings only in 1990.
Mr. Aguilar? DS Marcoleta, can you repeat your question?
I was trying to elicit an answer, Mr. Chair, that even prior to or upon the assumption of power of President Cory in 1986, if there are companies affiliated with the Lopez Group, either we call it Benpress Corporation, because Holdings Corporation was not yet incorporated at that time, were there companies that have encountered problems already with the DBP?
We have no knowledge of any transactions that time. We're not actually with DBP yet.
So, Mr. Chair, am I getting an answer like DBP was not
I think
involved in the
DS
transaction?
Marcoleta, the only record they have here is the loan in 1989, the Central CATV, yun, no? Hindi, yung unang-una, loan. 95 pa yung unang loan daw na grant, buy and tell.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask the DBP representatives whether or not they know that Meralco was acquired by the government during the last few years of the former President Marcos for non-payment of maturing loans, if they know that.
We have no personal knowledge of such
Do you
transaction,
do you
Mr. Chair.
know that any information na government acquired Meralco?
I have no information, Mr. Chair.
Who has the information, Mr. Chair?
Maybe we can ask the SEC about the status of Meralco, if we can research on the SEC records.
Mr. Chair, we will do that. We will check the previous records of Meralco.
Can you submit through email or to the committee secretariat the history of ownership of Meralco?
Yes, Your Honor. From the available records with the commission,
Yes.
we will do that.
From the 60s to present.
Because, Mr. Chair,
1970s.
Okay.
the information I got from the grapevine is that, and it seems to be very consistent, prior to the assumption of office of President Cory Aquino, Meralco was acquired by President Marcos' government because Meralco failed to pay its maturing obligations. The reason being that there was a devaluation in the 70s, and it is a loan from the World Bank through the DBP granted to Meralco, and that is the reason why the government acquired this company. And upon Mrs. Aquino's assumption to power, Meralco was turned over to the Lopez Company on a silver platter. At that time, information points to the fact, Mr. Chair, that the Lopez Company has only about 5% equity in that company. Mr. Chair, before the operation of the SPV, I'd like to ask the DBP representative if it is fair enough to assume that these NPAs have been transferred to the Asset Privatization Trust.
Do you have information on the query of DS Marcoleta, DBP, Attorney Adjong?
I would have no information of such transaction, Mr. Chair.
Can we get any?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Maybe we can ask Attorney Quezon because he was a lawyer already in 1986. He was a lawyer already in 1986 and he already was lawyering for the Lopez's in 1986. Maybe he has a recollection.
Sorry,
Attorney Quezon.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I joined the Lopez Group only in 1993. I was
1993.
with another law firm in 1986.
You were with Sisip Salazar.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Maybe,
Anyway, Mr. Chairman, I think DS Marcoleta is also referring to the reference point of this is the time that Meralco Foundation became a part owner of Meralco. And I think that Meralco Foundation was part owner of Meralco. No? Attorney Quezon, would you know that?
I'm not really familiar with the.
Anyway, Chairman, I think we should research on this. We can actually ask.
I think we should get the information from SEC on the ownership from the 1970s to present. Can you provide that document within 2 weeks, sir?
We will do that, sir, based on our available records.
Thank you.
So, make our report based on.
And the DBP, may I direct any information on the what was mentioned by DS Marcoleta on the loan from the World Bank course through the DBP, if there is such, for the Meralco purchase?
We will check our records.
Yes.
Yes.
During the late 70s or early 80s.
Mr. Chairman, can we have a suspension?
Okay.
1 minute suspension.
Suspension, 1 minute. Session resumed. DS Marcoleta, we need to wait for the all available records to push on the questions you are asking? Are you
Yes, Mr.
amenable to
Chair,
transfer to another topic for the meantime?
In the meantime, I will just ask the representatives of DVP present if they really believe that there are no records of all these transactions of these transferred assets to the asset privatization trust. I think they know that there was such a thing as asset
Maybe we can ask the president 1998. You want to ask Miss
Yes,
maybe-
Mr. Chair, if the president at the time was there,
no 1998 because she was the all present here are not members of the DBP during the 1990s. Maybe you can ask
Yes, Mr.
President
Chair.
Remedios Macalintal.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
can we ask the privatization and management office to be,
be
here,
invited.
to be invited so they can shed light on this matter that DS Marcoleta is asking?
I may direct the COMSEC to invite the head of agency of the privatization and trust
And management office,
management office.
which is the successor of APT.
Okay, I think they're in Makati, na Legazpi Village.
Mr. Chair, I think I will also request the committee to invite General Francisco Gatmaitan if he is still alive. Because he was the one appointed by President Cory at the time when Meralco was.
We will research if he's still alive and we will invite him.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
General
Also-
who? General.
So I would like if he is available, the committee should invite the former DBP chairman and former finance secretary Jesus P. Stanislao because I think he would know
May
all
we
the.
invite the former Secretary of Finance, Jesus Stanislao.
He's also former DBP chairman, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we will invite him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, DS Marcoleta. Next to interpellate is, before to recognize the next interpellator, may I ask Mr. Salvador Tirona of Lopez Holdings?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, presently, do you have any active loan from a government banking institution, GFI?
Presently, we do not have, Mr. Chairman.
Are you aware of, because here I was informed that there were several instances that the Lopez Group loans, the one mentioned here, the 4 loans, they have been asking for, they have been granted extension of due date, the maturity date. So they will not grant this if it was not requested. So why is this that you keep on requesting extension but there was no payment?
Mr. Chairman, may I just clarify that this may have something to do with the Maynilad loan. The Maynilad loan was granted at 1 billion, and it was a bridge loan or a short-term loan. If I'm not mistaken, this was for 3 or 6 months. And every time that there is a maturity, that's a normal practice that finance people would sit down with the lenders and work out a renewal of the short-term loan. So that's the reason why for Maynilad, there were several rollovers or renewals of the loan. It was not an extension per se of the due date, but rather a renewal of a new promissory note.
Okay. Of the 4 companies that defaulted on the loans, 2 applied for corporate rehabilitation, Maynilad and Bayantel. Is this correct?
Yes, two companies went through corporate rehabilitation, Mr. Chairman.
So, so we can say that these two companies are already mismanaged because they cannot already they seek the help of the courts already. So we can say that these are mismanaged. Would you say so?
No, actually, Mr. Chairman, may I just explain that the defaults of the loans of Bayantel and Maynilad, which were the two companies that went into a rehabilitation, were affected by the Asian financial crisis. The effects of the Asian financial crisis affected these companies. No? And for Bayantel, it was not Bayantel that petitioned for the rehabilitation, but rather creditors represented by the trustee Bank of New York. For Maynilad, on the other hand, it went through rehabilitation because it was at that time that a arbitration committee's decision was given, and yet we couldn't resolve the problems we had with MWSS. That's why the company had to resort to go to a rehabilitation petition to solve the problem of Maynilad.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tirona. May we ask Representative Mike Defensor of Anak Kalusugan Party List to interpolate?
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair. To all our colleagues, magandang umaga po, and to our resource persons. Mr. Chair, susundan ko na muna ho yung katanungan ninyo para lang humalinaw. Andito po wala po si Ma'am Makalingkag of the DBP. If I may ask her.
Hello,
Ayan.
who are you asking?
Si Ma'am po, DBP President Makalingkag.
Yes, President Makalintag. Makalintag.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Chair, if I may proceed. Ma'am, tatanungin ko na lang po kayo kasi susundan ko lang po muna yung tanong ni Mr. Chair. Doon na muna ho sa topic ng Maynilad 1 billion loan. Ma'am, nare-recall nyo po, binigyan nyo po ng loan ang Maynilad dahil po doon sa presentation nila, meron po silang mga 350 million loan from different, sa iba-iba pong mga financial institutions. Nagkaroon po kayo ng bridge facility na 1 billion. Tama po ba?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Now, Mr. Chair, ma'am, ito pong bridge loan na to ay wala pong collateral. Kung di po yung guarantee ng board members ng BenPres na sinasabi nila yung joint solidarity signature ang naging guarantee po. Tama po ba?
Well, this was many years ago, more than 20 years ago. Nakalimutan ko na siya. Maybe I can check.
It's okay, ma'am. Pero in the normal course of business, binibigay naman po yung ganito na 1 billion na walang collateral for the particular bridge financing na kailangan po at the time nung pong Maynilad.
Normally, ang collateral niyan mga facilities, pagkaganyan, normally, I don't recall kung anong collateral niyan. But usually, these are collateralized facilities.
Yes, ma'am. For the record po, minutes number 9, yung pong binabanggit ni Chairman, April 26, 2000, binigyan niyo po ng special one-shot transaction of a 1 billion facility. Ito pong itong Maynilad Water Services. And basically, ang naging guarantee po niya was the joint solidarity signature. Just to set the record straight, yan po yung nangyari. Minutes number 9, April 26, 2000. So, anyway, ma'am, you recall, meron po tayong 1 billion na binigay.
I think so, yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, ngayon po, ang based on I see Chairman Nanyagas, nandito rin po kasama natin. And if I may go back now to Mr. Chair, alam nyo, si Chairman Anyagas, when I was in housing, would guide me on the different aspects of housing at the early stage. Siya po yung tumutulong sa akin noon. At marami po tayo, Mr. Nanyagas, na pinag-uusapan noon dun sa non-performing loans ng housing portfolio, including Pag-ibig, NHMFC at NHA, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Nanyagas, ang tanong lang po namin kasi, ito pong kanina binanggit, nagkaroon po ng waiver on penalty fees by December 2004. Tama po ba, Mr. Chairman?
Hello, Congressman Mike. Sabi ko kay Chair kanina, hindi ko maalala exactly, pero pinadala na ngayon dito yung kinote sa'yo. Ang gusto kong malaman yung supporting documents kasi po meron po kaming paraan, palaging procedure sa DBP na kung merong gagawin ang dedesisyonan ng board ay merong rekomendasyon mula sa management na professional.
Tama po.
At yun ang gusto kong makita kung ano talaga ang tinutukoy na waiver. Kasi kung merong...
Chairman Anyagas, the supporting documents was emailed on another email, subsequent email. Maybe you can open it.
Hindi ko pa ho nakikita.
At any
Anyway.
At any rate, Chairman Anyagas, ito po kasing... you were the chairman tama po. No? Meron nung ibang presidente, sila po yung gumagawa sa study, yung credit committee, then they recommend to board. Tama po. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, alam nyo, Chairman Anyagas, hindi po lalabas to kung hindi po, kumbaga nakuha ho natin to ng patago Hindi po galing to sa DBP. So, yes, that's why Chairman Anyagas, maaari pong yung mga supporting documents, I hope, ibigay na po ng DBP tungkol dito. But at any rate, ito po, Chairman Anyagas, ang nagulat po kasi kami, yung tinanggal po yung guarantee ng BenPres. Kasi yun lang po yung pinanghahawakan natin on the 1 billion loan. The joint solidarity signature. Tapos tinanggal po siya sometime in 2004.
Hindi ba po kasama yon dun sa restructuring ng loan by the yung kaninang nabanggit nga ni attorney sa BenPres?
Yes.
Kasi maaari po, I'm not exactly sure, pero kung napag-usapan po sa rehabilitation court na ganun ang mangyayari, normally po sumasang-ayon kami kasi yung po ang most expedient way to solve the problem.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Anyaga, salamat po doon. Pero basically, could have happened na natanggal po yung guarantee dito sa project na to.
Alam niyo, Congressman Mike, you might want to look at the financial books of DBP if you want to confirm na merong na waive. Kasi po, lalabas po sa libro kung winave yung dapat ng kitain.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes. Unfortunately po, Chairman Anyagas, Mr. Chairman, ang lumabas po kasi dito sa SPV law, yung mga nalugi, kasi ayaw nila sabing condonation, ayaw nila sabing write-off.
Opo.
Parang charge to operations po naging treatment But basically, yun nga ho, lumalabas. Ang tanong ko lang, Chairman, ito po mga loans happened before 2000. So kayo po yung inabot ng mga failure na hindi pagbayad.
Gawa po nung gawa po nung crisis.
Opo. Mr. Chairman, ang tanong ko lang ho, bakit po hindi nagkaroon ng foreclosure dito sa mga loans na to? 4 po yan. Bayantel, BenPres, yung pong Maynilad, at saka po yung Sky Cable.
Ang pagkaintindi ko po, kailangan ho suriin mabuti kung a foreclosure will make better sense than a restructuring and rehabilitation. Yun po ang doon po nagbabase kung saan pupunta. Kaya hindi ho automatic na pag hindi nagbayad, foreclose kaagad. Kasi baka ho yung hawak nating assets na naka-mortgage ay kulang din na po sa loan principal. So kailangan may konting judgment po doon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, marami pong loans dito, almost 7 to 10 years po, hindi nabayaran na Mr. Chairman. So ang nangyari po, talagang restructuring po talaga. Chairman Anyagas ang naging direksyon ng DBP tungkol sa mga loans na to.
Meron pa pong isang konsiderasyon na hindi natin napag-usapan, yung pag nag-foreclose po, hihinto po yung performance ng duty ng korporasyon. Ano po? Kung may nilad man yan, baka huminto ang daloy ng tubig, et cetera po. Kasama po yun sa pag-consider kung anong gagawin ng bangko.
Mr. Chairman, isang last question lang po kay Chairman Anyagas. Chairman, hindi po ba sa DBP, in housing, I know you were exposed doon po sa mga loans na existing non-performing loans, lahat po yan. Alam po natin na hindi tayo pwedeng magbenta basta-basta dahil po sa gobyerno, may book value po at govern po tayo ng ganitong batas.
Correct.
Oho.
Kaya po kaya either ang mismong bangko ang magre-rehab or in this particular case, na aprubahan po ng Kongreso at Senado yung SPAV law which allowed DBP to move in that direction.
But prior to that, you could not move because there were governing laws. At delikado po tayo.
May mga bawal po, kaya hindi namin ginagawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, salamat po, Chairman Anyagas. May I now proceed to Ms. Cube of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas.
Ms. Cube.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Good morning po, Congressman Mike.
Yes, Ms. Cube. Good morning po. Ms. Cube, doon po sa accreditation process nyo, ano po yung qualification for a loan to be accredited para po dyan sa SPV?
Okay. Mr. Chair, the BSP at that time issued memorandum dated May 11, 2006 to all banks and non-bank financial institutions performing quasi-banking functions para po ilahad doon ang mga procedures, paano po makakapag-avail ng certificate of eligibility. So on the question of Congressman Mike, sorry po if I heard it right, paano po masasabi kung non-performing ang isang loan?
Ma'am, Ms. Cube, ano po ma'am? What will qualify? Ano po yung qualification para kayong maging accredited? I mean, tama ba? Accreditation ng ating loans? Yes.
Yes po, para po maging eligible ang SPL sa isang certificate of eligibility po to be issued by the BSP. Sir, sinasaad po doon sa memorandum na kailangan mag-submit po yung applicant institution or bank ng master list. Tapos po, dapat po nakasaad doon na non-performing loan na siya. Paano po masasabing non-performing loan? Sinasabi din po doon sa SPV Act na dapat po ay 100
80 days.
If I may. Dapat po ay if I may just refer to the law. It has been past due for 180 days and humihingi rin po kami ng certification from an authorized senior officer of the bank to certify that the assets to be sold are non-performing assets as defined by the SPV Act. Tapos po ang proposed sale or transfer of those NPAs are true sale. Then the notification requirements to the borrowers have been complied with. At yung pang-apat po at huli, maximum of 90-day period for negotiation and restructuring being complied with, sir.
So ano po yung maaaring maging batayan para hindi ka maging eligible?
Kapag po hindi nag-conform dun po sa apat na sinabi ko, halimbawa po hindi po ito true sale or the asset that was sold or transferred are not NPAs as defined by the SPV Act, sir.
Oh, so ibig sabihin po, yung Benpres at saka po yung Maynilad, ay sinasabi po batay doon sa inyong mga guidelines, eh hindi po siya non-performing asset pa at that time.
Sir, I can only speak of the fact that what BSP has issued was a COE for Bayantel and CATV, sir.
Okay. CATV. Bayantel at saka po yung Sky Cable po to, yung CATV.
Yung CATV po, sir, Philippine Home Cable na po pala siya as represented by DBP.
Tama po ba, Ms. Cube, na nakabatay po kayo sa ganyan, meron kayong regulasyon para dun sa eligibility? Kasi maaaring ang isang bangko, kahit na performing pa lang ang loan niya o maganda yung performance, ilalagay niya sa SPV para maka-discount o kung may kuntsabaan na nangyari.
Sir, in any implementing rules and regulations po ng batas, we ensure that there are safeguards of safety nets in order to avoid abuse, sir. So you are correct po. There are safety nets that was devised po.
So, klaro-klaro, Mr. Chair, no? Salamat, Ms. Cube. Binabanggit ni Chairman Anyagas, hindi namin pwedeng magbenta na that time kasi wala namang batas and govern tayo ng law. And then number 2, sinasabi nga ni Ms. Cube, yung criteria ng eligibility na hindi pumasok yung Bayantel at saka Maynilad. Pero itinuloy pa rin ang pagbenta. Now, I'll go to the legal of DBP. Attorney Adjong and of course Mr. Aguilar can also answer. Bago po magkaroon ng batas tungkol dito sa SPV, ano pong gumagabay sa atin sa pagbenta ng mga collaterals at non-performing assets?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of the policy in existence then, but as a matter of practice, DBP does not transfer NPAs because we are guided by a policy on handling bad accounts.
Mr. Chair, medyo conflict ata po yung binabanggit ng DBP. Sinasabi nila, we will not dispose of assets because we can handle bad accounts. And yet, ito pong asset ng Maynilad, asset ng Benpres, which technically are not so bad accounts, kahit nga ho ang BSP hindi binigyan ng eligibility to dahil batay doon sa criteria niya, hindi pasok, binenta naman natin under the special purpose vehicle. So again, I'd like to ask, outside of the SPV, ano po ang nag-govern na batas sa atin tungkol sa disposition of assets?
Sir, as a matter of law, DBP may rely on the provision of the Civil Code for the transfer or assignment of credits or other rights. In this case, Mr. Chair, as explained to this honorable committee, the bank lumped accounts that were eligible and non-eligible in the transfer to the SPV.
Sige po, papasukan ko po yung argumento nyo. Huwag natin gamitin yung SPV. Sabi nyo, pwede nyo i-assign yung assets based on the civil code. Paano po yung appraisal ng mga value?
May we just confer with the Mr. Aguilar, Mr. Chair, on this matter?
Mr. Chair, yung tinatanong niyo pa kung anong appraisal value ng properties under mortgage?
Hindi, kasi ang unang tanong ko, outside of SPAV, pag wala, kunyari, nung wala pa yung SPV, anong ginagamit yung batayan to dispose assets? Ang sabi ni Atty. Adjong, hindi nyo dinedispose yung assets nyo kasi meron kayong operation to handle non-performing assets. Sa inyo nang galing yan. Ngayon, sabi ko, kung ganun pala, bakit nyo dinispose? Tapos ang next na sagot was civil code, assignment of credit. Ang tanong ko, sige, inassign ninyo. Huwag nyo gamitin yung SPV. Ano yung valuation na ginagamit nyo?
Yun na nga po yung reason why we engaged Ernst & Young to do the valuation of the portfolio.
Mr. Aguilar, atras po tayo kasi ulitin ko kung walang SPV bago nagkaroon ng special purpose vehicle, ano ang batayan ninyo para magbenta ng assets?
Yung binasa po kanina ni Attorney Sor, yung reason why nagbenta ng DBP ng mga NPAs. Yun po yung batayan bakit po nagbenta ng mga NPAs. At yun rin po yung batayan bakit po nag-engage ang DBP ng financial advisor.
Mr. Chairman, gusto ko lang paulit sa kanila yung sinabi nila about the NPAs. Ano yung standard natin to sell NPAs? What's the standard followed by DBP? Para maulit lang for Congressman Defensor's guidance.
May we be allowed to get the policy on the transfer of NPAs, Mr. Chair?
Sige, okay na sa'yo, Congressman Defensor?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you, Honorable Remulla. Kasi po, well, Mr. Chair, I just want to quickly reply to that. Lahat naman po ng government financial institutions, isa lang po ang nag-govern na batas. And I'm surprised na yung legal ng DBP hindi alam. Are you aware, Attorney Adjong, Mr. Chairman, na merong case tayo sa Supreme Court ng Purificación Urbano Arrienda versus GSIS? Alam niyo po ba to? Nagdesisyon ng 2001.
We have to check the case, Mr. Chair. Ano po yun? Amienda versus GSIS?
Urbano Arrienda de Castro. Now, the reason na ni-raise ko po tong case na to, kasi ito pong taong to, nag-loan sa GSIS. Nung pong pinorclose po siya, gusto niyang i-buyback, hindi siya pinayagan, nagkaroon ng base price ang GSIS. Nagkaroon ng negotiation, eventually, naibenta ng GSIS sa ibang tao. Umabot po ito ng Supreme Court. And dito nakalagay dito, ano yung governing laws ng ating government financial institutions. Yung pong ating COA circular, meron po tayo niyan. Tama po ba, Attorney Adjong?
Yes, sir. Sir, clarify ko lang po, if this case pertains to AROPA po, to an acquired asset of GSIS.
Yes, Attorney Adjong, it is. So ano, Attorney Adjong, ang governing circular natin sa COA on the sale of assets? Okay, I will further refresh your mind. Kailan lang po nagsalita si Secretary Dominguez? 2019. Ang sabi po niya na sana itong PMO, yung Private Management Office, pwede na siya magbenta ng assets dahil daw yung COA Circular 89296 ay masyadong napakahirap sundan. Secretary Dominguez talking about this in 2019.
Mr. Chair, if I recall it right, COA Circular 89-296, if I'm correct, Mr. Chair, specifically excludes sale of ROPAs, Mr. Chair.
Yes, but according, and I will quote Secretary Dominguez, according to the Finance Chief, COA Circular 89296 requiring the sale of unproductive state assets and their appraised values has hampered rather than facilitated efforts by the government to dispose of these idle properties. Okay. Tapos meron po ba tayong DBM, Disposal of Government Property Manual?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So yan po yung nag-govern din sa DBM, sa atin, sa Development Bank of the Philippines.
Again, Mr. Chair, we have policies on disposal of ROPAs. Saan nakalagay?
Nakabatay po saan na batas ang mga disposal nyo?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, under COA Circular 89296, as mentioned, excludes disposal by GFIs of foreclosed assets or collaterals acquired in the regular course of business.
So COA circular lang po ang governing law, ang governing ano ninyo?
Again, Mr. Chair, we have a policy in the bank on that the bank observes on the disposal of ROPAs.
Okay, pero tama po ba na sinusundan nyo yung policy ng national government na dapat po yung book value ang sundan?
The policy of the bank, Mr. Chair, is in accordance with existing laws and regulations.
Ang simple naman ang tanong ko, Attorney Adjong eh. Tama po ba na ang policy ninyo at policy dapat ng lahat? Nakikita ko po ang Land Bank, kasama rin natin dito. At saka yung mga ibang government offices na dapat nakabatay ito doon sa appreciation na yung book value o yung total value ay hindi dapat mas mababa.
As a matter of policy on the part of the bank, Mr. Chair, bank policies are adopted in accordance with existing laws and regulations.
So anong ibig mo sabihin na, Attorney Adjong, exempted kayo dahil DBP kayo? Hindi kayo susunod sa gobyerno?
Hindi po.
Oh, so ano kayong policy?
Ang sinasabi ko po, Mr. Chair, is that the policy of the bank was adopted in accordance with existing laws and regulations po, Mr. Chair.
O ngayon, ang tanong ko, yung existing laws and regulations, hindi dapat kayo bumaba sa book value kung walang SPV. Tama po ba?
We would have to check, Mr. Chair.
Ang bilis mo sumagot, Mr. Chair. Ang bilis mo sumagot doon sa policy. Pag tinanong ko yung policy, hindi mo naman pa alam. So what is the policy? Di ba? It should not go below the book value.
I've requested, Mr. Chair, that we be given time to produce the... Actually, we're communicating with our head office now for the submission of the bank policy on disposal of assets.
Mr. Chair, we don't need that. We know that. Alam na po namin to. Pagka walang SPAV, kahit na po Secretary of Finance nagsalita, Chairman Nanyagas nandyan nagsalita na rin ng BSP na itong mga values ninyo, book value, kailangan nyo sundan. Now, under the SPV, wala akong problema kung lower kayo. Pero kailangan mayroon kayong eligibility, which sinabi nga ni Ms. Cube, batay doon sa guidelines, hindi nyo sinundan. So anyway, hindi na namin kailangan yung policy na yan kasi klaro naman yan eh. Land Bank, is Land Bank here? Para lang klaro. Tingnan, may I ask Mr. Sacro of the Land Bank of the Philippines?
Yes. Mr. Chair, good morning po.
Yes, good morning. Mr. Sacro, pasensya na po kayo at nahila kayo dito sa usaping to.
Good morning.
Yes. Mabilis na tanong lang po.
Good morning po.
Good morning. Mr. Sacro, tama po ba na may governing guidelines po tayo na pagka may assets tayo, hindi po tayo pwede magbenta ng mas mababa sa book value?
Ang ano po namin, ang policy po namin is we based it on our charter na kailangan po idadaan po muna sa public bidding, yun pong property. Pagka sinasabi po kasi natin na non-performing asset yan, dalawa pong klaseng asset yan. It's either non-performing loan or ROPA na tinatawag. So yung sinasabi ko po about the ROPA, yung disposition of assets. So una, public bidding. Pagka nag-fail po yung public bidding, ay tumatanggap na po kami ng negotiated sale na tinatawag. So pinapublish po namin yan. Ngayon, dinedetermine po namin yung valuation po ng ROPA based on the appraised value of that property. Yun po yung baseline po namin in setting the minimum bid price of that property. Yun po yung ginagawa po namin.
Thank you, Mr. Sacro. Just to qualify lang ko, no, it's either the appraised value or the book value, whichever is higher. Tama po ba?
Sa appraised value po kami nagtitingin ng minimum bid price po namin. Opo, appraised value. Iba po kasi yung book value.
Okay po. Pero more than usual,
Usually mas mataas po. Mas mataas po yung appraised value pag sa ROPA.
Opo. Salamat po. Doon po
There
sa
are times kasi na talaga siyempre nag-depreciate po yung property. So may mga impairment losses po na tinatawag. So yun, nababawas po sa book value ng property. Lalo na kung may mga improvements. So for example, yung property, may depreciation din po yan. So bababa po yung appraisal nun. Opo.
Opo. Thank you po, Mr. Sacro. Ngayon po doon sa non-performing loans naman po, paano po yung treatment nyo doon?
Wala po kasi akong experience sa pagbenta ng non-performing loans. Opo. Kaya wala po akong maiaano dyan. Kasi I think, syempre, ang valuation din siguro, baseline din, maybe on the, how much is the outstanding obligation. And maybe on the possibility, collectivity of that loan, yun po.
Mr. Chairman, tama po ba, Mr. Sacro, kasi lahat naman po ng loans ninyo, may collateral na at any given time, pwede nyo balikan at pwede nyo, yun po yung inyong i-foreclose. Tama po ba?
Hindi po lahat ng loans may collateral kasi hindi lang naman po yun yung kino-consider ng bangko. So may mga loans din po na clean loan na tinatawag. So we pursue collection based on the loan agreement. Yun po yung ano. Yung
but
mga remedyo po, depende po.
Yes. So, meaning, kahit na ho pa paano, kahit clean loan siya, may sort of guarantee or protection ng bangko bago mag-release ng loan?
Well, may mga, may mga credit enhancers na tinatawag ng bangko. Like yung mga JSS, mga issuance ng mga post-dated checks, mga ganun.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, maraming salamat, Mr. Sacro LVP, sa Land Bank of the Philippines. Maraming salamat po. Mr. Chair, so klarong-klaro po naman na batay dito sa mga pinag-uusapan po natin and based on the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, talaga po may governing rule pag wala po yung special purpose vehicle. At dito nakita naman natin na bagamat walang eligibility, ipinasok pa rin yung sinasabi nating mga loans na to. Ngayon, as a quick manifestation, Mr. Chair, gusto ko lang pong iliwanag and DBP may reply. Nakakatakot po yung sitwasyon nito kasi meron na, kunyari po, itong sinasabi nating loan na nakaraan, magaganda ho yung loan pero ibinenta pa rin po natin. Ano po yung maghihinto sa mga bangko ngayon, government financial institutions, wag na ho natin bayaan yung private, na yung mga magagandang loan nila, ilalagay nila ulit under a special purpose vehicle na inaprobahan po natin, na kung saan pwede magkaroon ng kontsabaan at mabibili nila muli yung kanilang loan ng mas mababa, ng discounted. Sinasabi kanina ng DBP, hindi ho namin binibenta yung mga loans namin dahil kaya namin i-handle. Pero lumalabas, in this particular case, yung 4 na loans, ipinasok po nila, bagamat yung 2 hindi pinayagan, walang certificate of eligibility. Ano ang nagtulak sa DBP para gawin yon? At klaro sa akin, Mr. Chairman, na illegal yung ginawa ng Development Bank of the Philippines. Nagsalita na po Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, nagsalita po ang Land Bank of the Philippines tungkol dito na talagang kailangan malinaw ang governing, ang batas na pumapaloob bago tayo magkaroon ng pagbibenta ng asset. For example, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
tanong ko lang kay Congressman Defensor. You're referring to what companies, what loans that were processed by DBP under the SPAV, which did not have any certificate of eligibility.
Thank
Ano
you,
po?
Mr. Chairman.
Maynilad yun eh.
Yung Maynilad po, Mr. Chairman, at saka yung Benpress Holdings, Mr. Chairman. Lumalabas
Bakit walang how did we arrive at the conclusion that they had no certificate of eligibility?
as stated by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Mr. Chair. Ang Bangko Sentral na po nagsabi, at mismo ang DBP nagsabi, na wala pong eligibility ang Maynilad at ang Benpress Holdings.
Pero they were still given the discount of SPAV in spite of the fact that they had no certificate of eligibility. Is that the point, Congressman Defensor?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Nagkaroon po ng diskwento na ibenta po nila kahit hindi pinayagan.
So malinaw po yun. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Defensor. Any further question? You have established the violation.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My last point, Mr. Chairman, sa DBP, and I think concern po dapat ng committee to, paano po ngayon? Kung may mga loans dyan existing tayo sa DBP, assuming, kunyari, 10 billion of good loans, magagandang loans, pwede po nilang ibenta sa SPV at wala pong makakahinto sa kanila. Batay doon sa kanilang reasoning na kahit na hindi aprubahan ng eligibility ng Bangko Sentral ay pwede sila magbenta. At yan po yung nakakatakot, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Di ba merong
Vice
kasi
Chairman.
meron tayong bagong batas ngayon, di ba? Na
Fees.
The fees law, di ba? Meron pa rin yatang guidelines yan na kinakailangan pa rin non-performing siya for at least 180 days. Pero would this not result to a company not paying its loans for 6 months to qualify for it? Posible ba yan, Attorney Adjong, under the fees law?
Actually, sir, if I may highlight a provision in the FIST law, section 12, letter B, there's a proviso that says nothing in this act shall be construed to prevent the transfer of NPAs under other applicable laws. So anyway, Mr. Chair, in our comment to the SEC on the IRR, on the draft IRR, we suggested that this be clarified so that if banks are not allowed to lump or commingle non-eligible accounts or NPAs to the eligible NPAs, it should be clarified to guide banks and other entities that may avail of the provisions of the
So are you admitting, Attorney Adjong, that there's a mistake on the part of DBP to lump the 4 loans together in spite of the fact that 2 of them did not qualify as because they had no COE?
No, Mr. Chair. Actually, we want a clear provision in the IRR on how this proviso in the law should be implemented, which says nothing in this act, meaning the FIST, shall be construed to prevent the transfer of NPAs under other applicable laws.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Congressman Defensor.
Ang problema kasi, Mr. Chair, ng DBP, ang tingin niya sa sarili niya private. Hindi niya naiisip na gobyerno siya, as earlier stated by Congressman Rimulya. Kasi ang private, pwede. Kahit na ba 100% niya na performing kung gusto niyang ibenta under SPV to enhance the other accounts, walang problema. Pero pag tayo, yung pinaloan mo, Maynilad, 1 bilyon, nagbabayad naman, maganda naman ang performance, bigla mong ibinenta ng 700 million, hindi maganda yun. Pagka yung account kunyari, and I will not talk about the Lopez loan, but I'm talking of the future, may nagbabayad 80%, bigla mong inilagay, diniscount mo na naman. Meron ho tayong graft and corruption doon. Kaya wag kong isipin ng DBP na siya ay privado. Public financial institution po siya at govern siya ng mga batas.
Congressman Defensor, do you have any more questions?
Wala na po, Mr. Chairman. Gusto ko lang po klaro for the record na yan po yung mga violation ng DBP on this particular issue. Maraming salamat, Mr. Chairman.
Noted. Thank you. Before we continue, because the previous first hearing a couple of congressmen motion to invite the other borrowers, but we committed to question them in closed door. So may we request the technical service to remove the Facebook streaming for executive session on the
Zoom na lang tayo.
Oo.
Zoom natin.
Pati yung Zoom tatanggalin na. Zoom. Ay, hindi pala tatanggalin yung Zoom, yung media, nandyan sa Zoom yung mga kampanya eh. So we need to remove the media, session suspended.